My name is Catherine Morgan, and I am 72 years old. I live in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Boston, Massachusetts, in a neighborhood where the paint peels from window frames and the sidewalks crack beneath winter frost. My husband, Thomas, passed away 6 years ago after 48 years of marriage that felt like both a lifetime and a single afternoon. He left me with memories, a small pension, and a heart that still aches when I see elderly couples holding hands at the supermarket. My son, Julian, is 39 years old. He works as a financial consultant at a prestigious firm downtown, the kind of place with glass walls and coffee that costs more than my weekly grocery budget. He married Victoria 3 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than my first house. Victoria comes from money, the kind that whispers rather than shouts. Old Boston wealth with family names on hospital wings and university buildings. I remember the day Julian called to invite me to dinner. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, and I was folding laundry in my small living room while a game show played softly on the television. The phone rang, and I felt that flutter of joy I always experience when I see his name on the caller identification screen. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice carrying that professional tone he uses even with family now. "Victoria and I want to take you to dinner this Saturday. There's this new place called Marcello's that just opened downtown. Everyone's talking about it." My heart swelled with happiness. Dinner with my son and daughter-in-law felt like a rare gift. We saw each other perhaps once every 2 months, and our conversations had grown shorter and more stilted since his marriage. Victoria was polite but distant, the kind of daughter-in-law who remembered birthdays with cards, but never called just to talk. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, already mentally reviewing my closet for something appropriate to wear. "What time should I meet you there?" There was a pause, just long enough to plant a seed of unease in my stomach. "Actually, Mom, we're meeting some of Victoria's colleagues there. Important people from her company. We thought it would be nice for you to join us afterward, maybe for dessert, around 8:30. The joy deflated slowly, like air leaking from a balloon. "Not dinner, then? Dessert. An afterthought." "Of course," I said, keeping my voice steady. 8:30 sounds perfect." After we hung up, I sat for a long time with the phone in my lap, staring at the pile of unfolded towels. Thomas would have been furious. He had always been protective of my dignity, ready to defend me from even the smallest slight. But Thomas was gone, and I had learned to swallow small hurts the way you swallow bitter medicine quickly, without dwelling on the taste. Saturday arrived with cold rain and gray skies that matched my uncertain mood. I spent the morning cleaning my already clean apartment, a nervous habit I had developed since becoming a widow. Physical activity kept my mind from wandering into territories of loneliness and self-pity. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I began preparing for dinner. My closet revealed its limitations immediately. Most of my clothes were practical cardigans and slacks suitable for grocery shopping and doctor's appointments, not elegant restaurants in downtown Boston. I finally settled on a navy blue dress I had worn to Thomas's funeral, pairing it with a simple strand of pearls he had given me on our 20th anniversary. They were cultured pearls, not expensive, but they caught the light in a way that made me feel less invisible. I took the bus downtown, a 45-minute journey that saved me the expense of parking. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and reflective, throwing back the lights of storefronts and restaurants. Marcello's occupied the ground floor of a renovated brownstone building on Newbury Street, one of those neighborhoods where even the air feels expensive. I arrived at 8:20, 10 minutes early, because my mother had taught me that punctuality was a form of respect. The restaurant's exterior was elegant but understated, a simple brass plaque beside a heavy wooden door, soft golden light spilling through tall windows. A doorman in a burgundy uniform stood beneath a green awning, and I felt suddenly acutely aware of my worn coat and practical shoes. "Good evening, madam," he said, opening the door with the practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had assessed me in one swift glance, the calculation people make about your worth based on your clothing and posture. I had become invisible to such judgments over the years, but they still stung like paper cuts. "Good evening," I replied, stepping into a world of warm lighting and soft, classical music. The interior took my breath away despite myself. The dining room glowed with candlelight reflected in gilt-framed mirrors. White tablecloths draped elegantly over round tables, and crystal stemware caught the light like captured stars. The walls were painted a deep burgundy, and original oil paintings hung in ornate frames. The air smelled of fresh bread, expensive wine, and herbs I couldn't identify. A young woman stood at the host station, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, her black dress perfectly tailored. She looked up as I approached, and I saw the same swift assessment the doorman had made. "Good evening," I said, clasping my worn purse a little tighter. "I'm meeting my son and daughter-in-law. The reservation is probably under Morgan, or perhaps Victoria Hayes Morgan." She consulted her leather-bound reservation book with one perfectly manicured finger. "I see a Morgan party here, but they've already been seated. Your name?" "Catherine Morgan. I'm Julian's mother." Something flickered in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or confusion. "One moment, please." She picked up a sleek black telephone and spoke quietly into it, turning slightly away from me. I stood in the entrance, suddenly aware of the other diners passing by, women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits, all moving with the confident ease of people accustomed to luxury. A man approached, tall and distinguished with silver hair and a precisely trimmed beard. He wore an impeccably cut charcoal suit, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue that assessed me with unsettling intensity. "Mrs. Morgan?" he said, and his voice carried an accent I couldn't quite place, perhaps Italian, perhaps something else entirely. "Yes, that's right. I am Antonio Russo, the general manager. It's a pleasure to meet you." He extended his hand, and I shook it, confused by the formality. "Your party is already seated. Please, allow me to show you to their table." He gestured toward the main dining room, and I followed him through the restaurant. We wove between tables where beautiful people ate beautiful food, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of privilege I had never truly belonged to. I caught glimpses of plates that looked like art towers of delicate ingredients, sauces painted in elegant arcs, garnishes that probably cost more than my electric bill. Then I saw Julian and Victoria. They sat at a table near the center of the room, a coveted location that announced importance. Victoria wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. Diamond earrings caught the candlelight, and her makeup was flawless. Julian looked handsome in a navy suit I didn't recognize, his dark hair styled with expensive product. They were deep in conversation with two other couples, all dressed with similar elegance, wine glasses in hand, and expressions animated. As we approached, Victoria looked up. Our eyes met, and I saw something I had never seen in her face before, not just surprise, but something closer to alarm. She leaned toward Julian, whispering urgently in his ear. He looked up, and his expression shifted from confusion to something that made my heart contract painfully. "Mrs. Morgan," Antonio said, his voice carrying clearly across the space between tables. Your son and daughter-in-law are right here." Every head at the table turned toward me. I felt suddenly like an exhibit in a museum, a curiosity to be examined and classified. I lifted my hand in a small wave, trying to smile. Julian half rose from his chair, his face flushed. "Mom, you're early. We said 8:30. I glanced at my watch, 8:28. "I'm sorry. The bus made good time." Victoria remained seated, her expression carefully neutral. She touched Julian's arm, a gesture that looked casual, but carried unmistakable intent. He sat back down slowly. "Well," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended in this grand space, "I can wait at the bar if you're not ready." "Mrs. Morgan?" Victoria said, her voice clear and carrying the educated crispness of private schools and cotillion classes. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use when delivering bad news. "I'm so sorry, but there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "We thought," Julian explained, "this is a business dinner, very important clients. We weren't actually expecting you to join us for the meal itself. We thought perhaps you might meet us for coffee afterward, somewhere more casual." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the table, the other guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes moving between Victoria, Julian, and me. One woman, brunette, elegant, probably Victoria's age, looked genuinely sympathetic. The others seemed merely embarrassed to witness this scene. "Oh," I said, heat flooding my face. "I must have misunderstood. Julian, I thought you said—" "Mom," Julian interrupted, not meeting my eyes. "Victoria's right. This is a really important meeting. Maybe we can grab lunch next week instead?" Antonio Russo stood beside me, and I felt rather than saw his body stiffen. The air between us seemed to crackle with tension I didn't understand. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her smile fixed in place. She looked at me the way you might look at a persistent salesperson or an unwelcome solicitor. Then she said the words that would change everything, speaking them just loudly enough for her companions to hear, but softly enough to maintain plausible deniability. "Honestly, Catherine, you're too poor to sit with us. This table cost more to reserve than you probably spend in a month. These people," she gestured elegantly at her guests, "they're used to a certain standard. I'm sure you understand." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Someone at the table gasped softly. The sympathetic woman's eyes widened in shock. Julian closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell Victoria she was wrong. He simply sat there, and his silence was somehow worse than her words. I stood frozen, my cheap purse clutched in both hands, my mother's pearls suddenly feeling like costume jewelry around my neck. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had survived my husband's death, the loneliness of widowhood, the slow erosion of my relationship with my only child. I would survive this too. "I understand," I said quietly, proud that my voice didn't shake. "I apologize for the intrusion. Have a lovely evening." I turned to leave, desperate to escape before the tears overwhelmed me, but Antonio Russo moved smoothly to block my path. His face had transformed into something cold and hard, his blue eyes now chips of ice. "Mrs. Hayes Morgan," he said, addressing Victoria with deadly politeness. "May I speak with you privately for one moment? There is a matter concerning your reservation that requires immediate attention." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Whatever it is can wait. We're in the middle of—" "No," Antonio said, his voice cutting through her words like a blade through silk. "It cannot wait. Please come with me now, or I will discuss it here in front of your guests. The choice is yours." Something in his tone made Victoria pause. She exchanged a glance with Julian, then rose gracefully from her chair, her smile strained. Of course. I'll just be a moment. She followed Antonio toward the host station, her heels clicking purposefully on the hardwood floor. I stood rooted in place, uncertain whether I should leave or stay, while the remaining guests at the table studied their wine glasses with sudden intense interest. Julian still wouldn't meet my eyes. The brunette woman finally broke the silence. That was unnecessarily cruel, she said quietly, looking at Julian. That's your mother. It's complicated, Julian muttered, but his face had gone pale. No, the woman replied firmly. It really isn't. At the host station, I watched Victoria's body language shift from confident to defensive to something approaching panic as Antonio spoke to her in low, urgent tones. She shook her head repeatedly, her hand gestures becoming more animated. Other diners were beginning to notice the commotion. The carefully cultivated atmosphere of elegant dining was developing cracks. Then Antonio returned to where I stood, Victoria trailing behind him, her face now drained of color. The transformation was startling. Moments ago she had been in complete control. Now she looked as though she might be sick. Ladies and gentlemen, Antonio announced, his voice carrying clearly through the dining room, causing nearby conversations to halt. I apologize for the disruption. Mrs. Morgan, would you please come with me to my office? There is something you need to see. Antonio, please, Victoria said urgently, grabbing his arm. This is ridiculous. Can't we discuss this privately? He looked at her hand on his sleeve until she removed it. You forfeited the right to privacy when you humiliated this woman in front of an entire dining room. Now, Mrs. Morgan, if you would. I followed him on shaking legs, aware of dozens of eyes tracking my movement. We passed through a doorway marked Staff Only and down a corridor lined with black and white photographs of Italy, the Amalfi Coast, Venetian canals, Tuscan vineyards. His office was small but elegantly appointed, dominated by a mahogany desk covered with papers and a laptop computer. Antonio gestured for me to sit in a leather chair, then opened a wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Roman Forum. He withdrew a manila folder, thick with documents, and placed it on the desk between us. Mrs. Morgan, he said gently, sitting across from me, I need to ask you some questions. First, are you the Catherine Morgan, widow of Thomas Morgan, who resided at 42 Elm Street from 1972 until 2003? I blinked in surprise. Yes, that's right. How do you... And did your husband own a small Italian restaurant in the North End called Russo's Kitchen from 1985 until it closed in 2007? My breath caught. Thomas's restaurant. The place where he had poured his heart and savings, trying to create something special. It had been a modest establishment, never making much money, but loved by its regular customers. He had named it after his business partner, Antonio Russo Sr., an immigrant from Naples who had taught Thomas everything about authentic Italian cuisine. Yes, I whispered. But it closed after Thomas's heart attack in 2007. We couldn't keep it running. The building was sold to pay medical bills and funeral expenses. I don't understand. Antonio opened the folder and withdrew several documents. Mrs. Morgan, I am Antonio Russo Jr. My father was your husband's partner. After the restaurant closed and the building was sold, my father used his share of the sale and quite a bit more to invest in a new venture. But he was already ill with cancer. He died 6 months later. He slid a document across the desk. It was a partnership agreement dated 2007 with both Thomas Morgan's and Antonio Russo Sr.'s signatures. Before he died, my father made me promise to honor the agreement he and Thomas had made. They always planned to open a grand restaurant together if they ever had the capital. The sale of the building and my father's life insurance gave me that capital. I spent 5 years working in restaurants across Italy and America, learning, saving, planning. Marcello's opened 3 years ago. He pushed another document toward me. This one was newer, printed on heavy legal paper with a gold seal at the bottom. According to the partnership agreement and in accordance with my father's will, you, Catherine Morgan, are the 50% owner of this restaurant. You have been since the day we opened. I have been trying to locate you for months, but you had moved from your old address and your phone number had changed. My letters were returned. I had almost given up hope. I stared at the document, the words swimming before my eyes. Ownership, partnership, asset value, monthly distributions. The numbers were staggering: 6 figures, 7 figures, impossible numbers. This can't be real, I said faintly. Thomas never mentioned anything like this. We were struggling. I sold almost everything to pay his medical bills. If there had been any money... The agreement was signed just 2 weeks before Thomas's heart attack. Antonio said gently. I doubt he had time to discuss it with you. And the money didn't exist then, only the promise of it. My father and Thomas believed in each other, in their vision. They made a pact that if either of them died, the survivor would build their dream and share it equally with the deceased partner's spouse. My father kept that promise. And now, Marcello's is one of the highest-grossing restaurants in Boston. He withdrew another paper, a financial statement. The numbers made me dizzy. This is your share of last year's profit, he explained. The money has been held in a trust account, waiting for you. Mrs. Morgan, you are not poor. You are actually quite wealthy. You own half of this building, half of this business, and half of everything it has earned for the past 3 years. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was telling me. My mind kept returning to my tiny apartment, the bus rides, the careful budgeting, the worn coat and practical shoes. The way I had swallowed Victoria's cruelty, because I believed I had no choice, no power, no worth beyond what my son and daughter-in-law chose to grant me. I don't understand, I finally managed. Why didn't Thomas tell me? Why didn't your father? I think Thomas meant to, Antonio said softly. But death doesn't wait for convenient moments. My father wrote you letters, dozens of them explaining everything. They're all here. He patted a thick stack of envelopes in the folder. All returned. Address unknown. Tears finally came then, hot and overwhelming. I covered my face with my hands and wept for Thomas, for the poverty I had endured unnecessarily, for the humiliation I had just suffered, for all the years of feeling invisible and worthless. Antonio quietly pushed a box of tissues across the desk and waited with the patient kindness of someone who understood grief. When I finally composed myself, I looked up at him. Victoria, she didn't know about any of this? His expression hardened. Obviously not, though that excuses nothing. The way she spoke to you. He shook his head. In my father's culture, in Thomas's culture, the way you treat elders, especially parents, reflects your character. What she did out there was unconscionable. What happens now? I asked, my voice still shaky. Antonio leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing to his lips. Now, Mrs. Morgan, you decide. This is your restaurant as much as mine. You are the co-owner. Victoria Hayes Morgan and her guests are currently dining in your establishment at a table you paid for, eating food purchased with your money, being served by your staff. The question is, what would you like to do about it? I sat in Antonio's office for perhaps 20 minutes, trying to absorb the magnitude of what I had just learned. He explained everything patiently: the partnership agreement, the trust account, the monthly profit distributions I had never received, the property deeds, the business licenses. He showed me bank statements, tax documents, incorporation papers. Every piece of evidence reinforced the impossible truth. I was no longer the struggling widow I believed myself to be. "How much?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The trust account, how much?" Antonio consulted a document. With 3 years of accumulated profits and compound interest, approximately $2,400,000. That doesn't include your ongoing ownership stake, which entitles you to 50% of future profits, which have been averaging about $600,000 annually per person. The numbers were incomprehensible. I had been skipping meals to stretch my pension check. I had been wearing shoes with holes in the soles. I had been terrified of unexpected medical expenses because I had no cushion, no safety net. And all along, I had been a millionaire. "I need a moment," I said faintly. I need to think." "Of course," Antonio said. "Take all the time you need. Would you like some water? Perhaps something stronger?" Water would be lovely. He left the office, and I sat alone with the documents spread across the desk like evidence in a trial. I thought about Victoria's words. "You're too poor to sit with us," and felt a flame of anger kindle in my chest. Small at first, but growing steadier. I thought about Julian's silence, his unwillingness to defend his own mother. I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, believing I had no right to expect more. Thomas's voice echoed in my memory, something he had said to me decades ago when Julian was just a child. "Catherine, never let anyone make you feel less than you are. Your worth isn't measured by your bank account or your zip code. It's measured by your character, your kindness, your strength." I had forgotten that lesson, or perhaps I had never truly learned it. But I was learning it now. When Antonio returned with a glass of ice water, I had made my decision. "I want to go back out there," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "I want them to know, all of them. Not because I want revenge, though I would be lying if I said revenge didn't appeal to me, but because I won't let my son or his wife treat me that way without consequences. They need to understand that poverty doesn't equal worthlessness, and wealth doesn't excuse cruelty." Antonio studied my face carefully. "Are you certain? This will be dramatic. It will change your relationship with your son, possibly permanently. Once words are spoken publicly, they cannot be unspoken." "Our relationship is already broken," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "Julian allowed his wife to humiliate me in public. He sat there in silence while she told me I was too poor to share their table. That silence broke something between us that might not be repairable. But at least he'll understand that his mother is not someone to be pitied or dismissed." "Okay," Antonio said, standing. "Then let's do this properly. Come with me." He led me not back to the dining room, but to a small private office down another corridor. Inside, he made several phone calls to the restaurant's lawyer, to the accountant, to someone he referred to only as the signature person. While we waited, he had one of the servers bring me a beautiful meal handmade pasta with white truffle sauce, a Caesar salad prepared tableside, warm bread with olive oil infused with rosemary. I realized I was starving. "Eat," he insisted. "You're going to need your strength." The food was extraordinary, each bite a revelation of flavor and texture. This was what Thomas had dreamed of creating, I realized. This level of excellence, this perfection. He would have been so proud. Within 45 minutes, 2 men in business suits arrived, the lawyer and accountant. They brought more documents, a laptop computer, and a small leather folder that Antonio handled with reverent care. They spent another 30 minutes walking me through paperwork, having me sign in dozens of places. confirming my identity with my driver's license and social security card. The lawyer explained that as co-owner, I had full authority over restaurant operations, staffing, finances, and most relevantly, guest services. Essentially, he said, you have the right to refuse service to anyone at any time for any reason that doesn't violate discrimination laws. Which means if you want to ask a guest to leave because they were rude to you, that's entirely within your rights as the property owner. I understand, I said. Finally, Antonio opened the leather folder and withdrew something that made my breath catch a small brass nameplate, freshly engraved, reading, Catherine Morgan, co-owner. This goes on your office door, he explained. The one next to mine. It's been waiting for you since the day we opened. He pinned something else to my dress, a small gold pin in the shape of the restaurant's logo. All ownership and senior management wear these, he said, so the staff knows who you are. I looked down at the pin catching the light, this tiny symbol of authority and belonging, and felt something shift inside me. I was no longer the invisible widow in the worn coat. I was Catherine Morgan, co-owner of one of Boston's finest restaurants. And I had been all along. We returned to the dining room together, Antonio and I, walking side by side like the business partners we actually were. I felt his quiet support, his steady presence, and drew strength from it. The dining room had filled even more in the time I'd been gone, every table occupied, a line of people waiting at the host station, the air alive with conversation and laughter, and the musical clink of silverware against china. Victoria's table was exactly as I had left it. She sat with her back partially to us, her hand resting possessively on Julian's arm, her voice carrying across the space as she told some animated story that had her companions laughing. Julian looked miserable, his smile forced, but he nodded along dutifully. Antonio signaled to one of the servers, a young man named Marcus, whom I would later learn was studying business management at Boston University. Marcus approached us immediately, standing at attention. Marcus, Antonio said clearly, please inform the Morgan party that Mrs. Catherine Morgan, co-owner of Marcello's, requests their immediate presence. They are to come to the private dining room without delay. This is not a request. It is a requirement. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and moved toward the table. I watched Victoria's expression shift from annoyance at the interruption to confusion to something approaching alarm as Marcus delivered the message. She turned in her seat, scanning the restaurant until her eyes found me standing beside Antonio, wearing the small gold pin that declared my status. Julian went pale. He said something to Victoria, his voice too low to hear, and she shook her head adamantly. But Marcus waited, polite but immovable, until finally Victoria stood with jerky, angry movements, and Julian followed. Their guests remained at the table, watching with undisguised curiosity. We met them in the corridor outside the private dining room, an elegant space usually reserved for intimate celebrations and business meetings. Antonio held the door open, gesturing for Victoria and Julian to enter. Neither of them wanted to, that much was clear, but refusing would have caused an even bigger scene in front of the dining room full of witnesses. Inside, the room was beautiful cream walls, soft lighting, a long table set with Marcello's finest china and crystal. Antonio closed the door firmly behind us, and the sudden silence felt heavy with anticipation. "What is this about?" Victoria demanded, her voice sharp with barely contained fury. "We're in the middle of an important business dinner. You can't just summon us like—" "I can, actually," I said quietly, and something in my tone made her stop mid-sentence. "Sit down, please, both of you." "Mom, what's going on?" Julian asked, his eyes moving between Antonio and me with growing panic. The manager said you're the co-owner? That doesn't make sense. You live in a tiny apartment in a poor neighborhood. I finished for him. Yes, I do, because until 1 hour ago, I believed I had no other options. Because after your father died, I sold everything to pay medical bills and funeral expenses. Because I've been living on a small pension, carefully budgeting every dollar, skipping meals, wearing clothes until they fall apart. Because that's what I thought was my reality. I pulled out a chair, not at the head of the table, but in the middle, a position of equality, and sat down. Antonio remained standing by the door, silent but watchful. Victoria and Julian stayed frozen in place. Sit, I repeated, and this time it was not a request. They sat, Victoria on one side of the table, Julian on the other, both perched on the edge of their chairs, as though ready to flee. I pulled the manila folder from where I had tucked it under my arm and laid it on the table between us. Your father and Antonio Russo Sr. were partners, I began, speaking directly to Julian. Not just friends, not just colleagues, but legal business partners with plans to build something extraordinary. When the old restaurant closed, they signed an agreement to use the proceeds to fund a new venture. Your father died 2 weeks later, before he could tell me about any of it. Antonio Sr. died 6 months after that, but not before making his son promise to honor their partnership. I opened the folder and withdrew the partnership agreement, sliding it across the table to Julian. He picked it up with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the legal language, his father's signature at the bottom. Antonio Jr. spent 5 years preparing to open this restaurant, I continued. He trained in Italy, worked in Michelin-starred kitchens, saved every penny. Marcello's opened 3 years ago, and according to the terms of the partnership agreement, I became a 50% owner on opening day. I just didn't know it because I had moved from our old address, and all the letters explaining this were returned. Until tonight, I believed I was exactly what Victoria said. I was too poor to sit with you. Victoria's face had gone from flushed to pale to flushed again, cycling through emotions like a traffic light. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're saying you own this restaurant? That you've been a millionaire all along while letting everyone believe? I didn't let anyone believe anything, I interrupted, my voice sharp. I genuinely did not know. The trust account holding my share of the profits contains approximately $2,400,000. My annual income from this restaurant is around $600,000. I own half of this building, half of this business, and half of everything it generates. So when you told me I was too poor to sit at your table, Victoria, you were telling the actual owner of the restaurant that she wasn't good enough for you. The silence that followed was profound. Julian had gone completely still, the document clutched in his hands, his eyes fixed on his father's signature as though it might disappear if he looked away. Victoria seemed to be processing information her brain refused to accept, her mouth opening and closing without sound. But more importantly than any of that, I continued, my voice softening slightly. When you humiliated me in that dining room, Julian, you said nothing. You are my son, my only child, the person I raised and loved and sacrificed for. And when your wife told me I was too poor to sit with you, you looked away. You were embarrassed by me, ashamed of me. Mom, Julian started, his voice cracking. Let me finish, I said firmly. I came here tonight because you invited me. Yes, you said to come for dessert, but I misunderstood and arrived early. That was my mistake. But instead of welcoming me, instead of making room, instead of defending me, you both made it clear that I was an embarrassment, an inconvenience, someone whose poverty reflected badly on your success. Tears were streaming down Julian's face now, and part of me wanted to comfort him the way I had when he was a child, with scraped knees and hurt feelings. But I had spent too many years making myself smaller for his comfort. This time, he needed to sit with his discomfort, learn from it, grow from it. I won't pretend the money doesn't matter, I admitted. Knowing I'm financially secure changes things. It changes what I can do, where I can live, how I can spend my remaining years. But it doesn't change what happened tonight. The cruelty of your words, Victoria. The weakness of your silence, Julian. Those things happened regardless of what's in my bank account. I'm sorry, Julian whispered, his voice barely audible. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I didn't speak up. I was caught off guard, and Victoria's colleagues were there, and I just froze. But that's no excuse. There is no excuse. No, I agreed. There isn't. Victoria had been silent throughout this, but now she seemed to find her voice. You can't honestly expect me to apologize for not knowing you were wealthy. How could I have possibly known? You dress like... She gestured at my outfit. You take the bus. You live in that neighborhood. You never mentioned having money. Because I didn't know I had any, I said patiently, as though explaining something to a slow child. But that's not actually the point, Victoria. The point is that you judged me, found me wanting, and publicly humiliated me based solely on your perception of my economic status. You decided I wasn't worthy of basic human kindness because I appeared to be poor. What does that say about your character? She flinched as though I had struck her. It wasn't like that. I was trying to protect the business dinner. My colleagues are important, and I was an embarrassment, I finished. Yes, we've established that. But let me ask you something, Victoria. If I had arrived wearing designer clothes and expensive jewelry, if I had pulled up in a luxury car, would you have treated me differently? Her silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said quietly. And that's the problem. Your kindness, your respect, your basic human decency, all of those things are conditional, based on someone's perceived value to you. That's not how families are supposed to work. That's not how people are supposed to treat each other. Antonio finally spoke from his position by the door. Mrs. Hayes Morgan, Mr. Morgan, I think you should know that several other diners witnessed the interaction earlier. Word has spread through the restaurant that you publicly humiliated the co-owner. This will have social consequences. Boston is a smaller town than people realize, especially in certain circles. What you did tonight will follow you. Victoria's face drained of color again. You can't be serious. Are you threatening us? Not threatening, Antonio corrected. Informing. The woman you treated with such contempt is now revealed to be not only the co-owner of one of Boston's most successful restaurants, but also someone who was wronged publicly and dramatically. That's a story people will tell. In your social circles, in your professional circles, wherever you go. You've made yourselves the villains in a particularly compelling narrative. Jesus, Julian breathed, his head in his hands. Victoria, what did you do? What did we do? What are you going to do? Victoria asked me, her voice tight with anxiety. Are you going to have us thrown out, banned from the restaurant? Use your new position to damage our reputations? I considered the question carefully. The old Catherine, the one who had walked in here an hour ago, would have said no, would have minimized the hurt, would have smoothed things over because keeping the peace was safer than demanding justice. But that Catherine had died in the space between humiliation and revelation. This Catherine was different. I'm not going to have you thrown out, I said finally. You're going to finish your dinner, make polite conversation with your colleagues, pay your bill, which, I'm told, will be substantial, and leave like civilized people. But after tonight, You need to understand something. Our relationship has fundamentally changed. I am no longer the desperate widow grateful for scraps of attention from her successful son. I am no longer the embarrassing poor relation you can dismiss and diminish. I am your mother, Julian, and I deserve better than what you gave me tonight. You do, he said, his voice thick with tears. You absolutely do. Mom, please, let me make this right. Let me. You can't make it right, I interrupted gently. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. But you can learn from it. You can decide what kind of man you want to be, someone who stands up for the people he loves, regardless of how it looks to others, or someone who chooses social comfort over moral courage. That's a choice only you can make. I stood, gathering the documents back into the folder. Antonio opened the door and I walked toward it, then paused at the threshold. One more thing, I said, turning back. The money changes my circumstances, but it doesn't change who I am. I'm still the same person who raised you, Julian. The same person who sat up with you when you were sick, who helped you with homework, who celebrated your successes and comforted your failures. The same person who loved you unconditionally, without regard for your achievements or status or bank account. I wish you had been able to show me even a fraction of that same unconditional love. I wish you had valued me for who I am, not for what you thought I could or couldn't contribute to your image. I left them sitting there, two beautiful people in expensive clothes at an elegant table, surrounded by luxury, but looking utterly bereft. Antonio followed me out, closing the door softly behind us. How do you feel? He asked as we walked back toward his office. Tired, I admitted. Sad, angry, relieved, all of it at once. That's normal, he said. You've been through a tremendous shock, followed by a confrontation that required immense courage. You should be proud of yourself. I don't feel proud, I said honestly. I feel like I should have demanded that respect years ago, money or no money. I feel like I taught my son that it was okay to treat me as lesser because I accepted being treated that way. You survived the loss of your husband and dealt with financial hardship using the limited information and resources you had, Antonio said firmly. You did nothing wrong. Your son made his own choices tonight, and so did his wife. Their behavior is not your fault or your responsibility. We reached his office, and he held the door open for me. What would you like to do now? You're welcome to return to the dining room. Take a seat at any table you choose. Or we could discuss business matters. There's quite a bit to cover. Or you could go home and process everything, and we'll meet tomorrow to go over details. I sank into the leather chair, suddenly exhausted. I think I need to go home, I admitted. This is too much to absorb all at once. But before I leave, I need to know what happens next. With the restaurant, with the money, with everything? Antonio sat across from me, pulling out a legal pad and pen. Tomorrow, we'll meet with the accountant and lawyer again. They'll help you access your trust account, set up proper banking, arrange tax planning. You'll need to make some decisions about your ongoing role in the restaurant, how involved you want to be, whether you want to draw a regular salary, how we'll handle profit distributions going forward. I don't know anything about running a restaurant, I said, feeling panic rise. Thomas was the one with the experience and vision. You were just the woman who supported his dream, managed the household finances, raised your son, and survived years of hardship with grace and dignity, Antonio interrupted. Don't underestimate your value. And you don't need to know about running a restaurant, that's what I'm here for. But you do need to understand the business enough to make informed decisions as an owner. We'll teach you. It will take time, but we'll teach you. He made a few notes on the pad. In the immediate term, you should think about your living situation. That apartment you described, is that where you want to stay? Or would you prefer to find something more comfortable now that you have the resources? The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on the emotional aftermath of the evening that I hadn't yet processed the practical implications of sudden wealth. I could move. I could live anywhere. The tiny apartment with its thin walls and temperamental heat was no longer my only option. I don't know, said honestly. That apartment has been my home for 6 years. It's where I learned to live without Thomas. It feels wrong to just abandon it. You don't have to decide tonight, Antonio assured me. These are long-term questions. For now, let me arrange a car to take you home. You shouldn't be taking the bus after the evening you've had. I can't afford... I started, then stopped, the words suddenly absurd. I mean, I can afford it now, can't I? You can afford a great many things now, Antonio said with a small smile, including basic dignity and comfort. Let me call you a car. While he made the call, I gathered my coat and purse, feeling strangely disconnected from my body, as though I were watching myself from a distance. This morning, I had been one person. Tonight, I was someone else entirely. The external circumstances had changed dramatically, but had I actually changed? Was I still the same Catherine Morgan underneath, or had the revelation transformed something fundamental in my character? The car arrived quickly, a sleek black sedan with a professional driver who held the door open and called me Mrs. Morgan, with genuine respect. As we pulled away from Marcello's, I looked back at the golden windows, the elegant facade, the line of people still waiting to get in. That was mine, at least partly. That success, that beauty, that dream realized I had helped make it possible, even unknowingly. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed in my tiny apartment, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening in my mind. Victoria's contemptuous words, Julian's cowardice, the revelation in Antonio's office, the confrontation in the private dining room. Each memory felt surreal, as though it had happened to someone else or in a dream. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, I got up and made tea, sitting at my small kitchen table with the manila folder Antonio had given me. By the weak light of my single overhead bulb, I read through every document, the partnership agreement, the business incorporation papers, the trust account statements, the profit distribution calculations. I also read the letters Antonio Sr. had written to me, his English imperfect, but his meaning clear. He had wanted me to know that Thomas's dream lived on, that his friend's family would be cared for, that the promise made between partners would be kept. Dear Mrs. Catherine, one letter began, dated just weeks before Antonio Sr.'s death. Your Thomas was like brother to me. We dreamed together, we worked together, we planned for big future. Now I am sick, but I make promise to him in heaven. His family will have their share. His dream will live. I tell my Antonio Jr. he must do this thing. He must make the restaurant we always talked about. And he must find you and tell you that you are partner, you are owner, you are family. Please forgive old man for not explaining sooner. English is hard, legal words are harder. But heart is clear. You are not forgotten. Thomas is not forgotten. Restaurant will be beautiful, like he wanted. You will be proud. Tears fell onto the old paper, and I wiped them carefully away. 2 men I had never properly thanked. 2 partners who had believed in a dream bigger than themselves. 2 friends who had valued loyalty and integrity over profit. And they had left me a legacy I was only now beginning to understand. At 8 o'clock, my phone rang. Julian's name appeared on the screen, and I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Mom? His voice sounded rough, as though he hadn't slept either. Please don't hang up, I need to talk to you. I'm here, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I can't stop thinking about last night, about what I did or didn't do, about how I let Victoria treat you, about my own cowardice. He took a shaky breath. I've been up all night, and I keep trying to understand how I became someone who would behave that way toward his own mother. Someone Dad would be ashamed of. Your father would be disappointed, I agreed quietly. But he would also want you to learn from this, to be better. I want to be better, Julian said urgently. I want to apologize properly, not over the phone. Can I come see you? Today? Please? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to make him wait, to let him sit with his guilt a while longer. But another part, the part that was still his mother, despite everything, recognized genuine remorse in his voice. All right, I said. But Julian, you should know that an apology isn't going to fix everything. What happened last night revealed something broken in our relationship, something that's probably been broken for a while. Fixing that will take more than words. I know, he said, but I want to try. I need to try. Come at 10 o'clock, I told him, and come alone. I'm not ready to see Victoria yet. After we hung up, I showered and dressed carefully, choosing a simple gray dress and the pearls Thomas had given me. I tidied the apartment, though it was already clean, and made coffee. At precisely 10 o'clock, Julian knocked on my door. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and swollen, his face pale and drawn. He wore jeans and a simple sweater, nothing like the expensive suit from the previous evening. He looked young and lost, and my maternal instincts warred with my hurt pride. Come in, I said, stepping aside. He entered the apartment and looked around as though seeing it for the first time, though he had visited perhaps half a dozen times over the years since I moved here. I watched him take in the worn furniture, the small kitchen, the narrow bathroom visible through a half-open door. The space that had been my entire world, made visible to him in all its modest limitations. I've never really looked before, he said quietly, at how you've been living. I always told myself you were fine, that you were managing, that you didn't need anything. But I never actually looked. No, I agreed. You didn't. We sat at the kitchen table, and I poured coffee into mismatched mugs. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I'm sorry, Mom, Julian finally said, his voice breaking. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. For last night, yes, but also for all the nights before that. For all the ways I let my new life pull me away from you. For allowing Victoria to dictate how often I saw you, how I treated you. For becoming someone who would be embarrassed by his own mother. Why? I asked simply. Why did you let it happen? He rubbed his face with both hands. Victoria comes from this world where everything is about image and status and connections. When we first got married, I thought it was exciting, the parties, the networking, the feeling of moving in elite circles. But somewhere along the way, I started adopting her values. Started seeing people the way she sees them, as useful or not useful, impressive or embarrassing, assets or liabilities. And I was a liability, I said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. In her eyes, yes, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. And I let her eyes become mine. I let her convince me that your poverty reflected badly on my success, that bringing you around her colleagues would make me seem less accomplished. I let her reshape my understanding of worth until it was all about money and status and perception. Did she know you were doing this? I asked. Did she explicitly tell you to distance yourself from me? Or did you just sense what she wanted? He was quiet for a long moment. Both, I think. She never said outright, don't see your mother. But she would make comments. Little observations about how you dressed, how you lived, how you didn't quite fit in with her family or our social circle. And I didn't push back. I didn't defend you. I just let those comments accumulate until I started believing them myself. What changed last night? I asked. Why are you here now, when you wouldn't even speak up for me then? Everything changed, he said intensely. Finding out about the restaurant, realizing you've been wealthy all along, it shattered the narrative I'd been telling myself. I couldn't maintain the fiction that you were somehow less than us, that we were doing you a favor by including you in our lives. The whole foundation of my justification crumbled. Julian, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. I don't want you to respect me now because I have money. I need you to respect me because I'm your mother, because I raised you and loved you and sacrificed for you. The money is irrelevant to my worth as a person. I know that, he said quickly. I do know that, and that's what makes last night so horrifying. I treated you badly, not because you actually were less valuable, but because I had convinced myself that financial status was equivalent to human value. I was wrong, completely, fundamentally wrong. I sipped my coffee, studying my son's face. He looked sincere, truly, remorseful. But sincerity and remorse weren't enough. Actions would matter. Change would matter. What about Victoria? I asked. Have you talked to her? His expression darkened. We talked most of the night. She's not handling this well. She's embarrassed and defensive and keeps trying to minimize what she said. She wants to pretend the whole thing was just a misunderstanding, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But she did mean it, I said. That's the point. She meant exactly what she said, that I was too poor to sit with her. The only thing that's changed is that now I'm not poor, so her statement was factually incorrect. But the sentiment behind it hasn't changed. Julian nodded slowly. I'm starting to realize that. I'm starting to see a lot of things I've been willfully blind to. The way she treats service staff. The way she talks about people who aren't in her social circle. The way she measures everyone's worth in dollars and connections. What are you going to do about it? I asked. He met my eyes. I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep living the way I have been. I can't be married to someone who would say what she said to you. And I definitely can't be the kind of person who would sit silently while she said it. We talked for another 2 hours. Julian told me about his marriage, the cracks that had been appearing, the arguments about money and priorities, Victoria's spending habits and social obsessions. I told him about my years of widowhood, the loneliness, the financial struggles, the gradual shrinking of my world. We were honest with each other in a way we hadn't been in years, maybe ever. When he finally left, we hugged for a long time at the door. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a tentative reconnection between a mother and son who had lost their way and were trying to find their way back. After he left, I called Antonio to confirm our afternoon meeting. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called a real estate agent and asked about apartments in better neighborhoods. Not luxury penthouses, not showpieces, but comfortable spaces with good light and quiet neighbors. Places where I could start fresh, carrying Thomas's memory with me, but no longer bound by the poverty that had constrained me. Change was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. The question was, who would I choose to become? 3 months passed before I set foot in Marcello's again. In that time, my life underwent a metamorphosis that sometimes felt like being reborn. With Antonio's guidance and the help of financial advisors, I moved into a lovely 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood with a small balcony where I could grow herbs and flowers. I bought new clothes, not designer labels. but quality pieces that fit well and made me feel dignified. I started taking an Italian cooking class at a community center, honoring Thomas's memory and the business I now partly owned. Most importantly, I began learning about the restaurant industry. Antonio was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough. 3 times a week, I would come to Marcello's during off hours, and he would walk me through everything: menu planning, inventory management, staff scheduling, customer service standards, financial statements, health regulations. I absorbed it all hungrily, discovering an aptitude for business I never knew I possessed. "Your husband chose his partner well," Antonio told me one afternoon as we reviewed profit and loss statements in the office that now bore both our names on the door. "You have a natural head for numbers and logistics. Thomas knew what he was doing when he trusted you to be his partner." "Thomas always believed I could do more than I believed myself," I said softly. "He used to say I was the smartest person he knew who never acknowledged her own intelligence." Julian and I had rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. He came to visit me once a week, usually on Sunday afternoons, and we would cook together or walk in the park or simply talk. He had moved out of the home he shared with Victoria, filing for separation and eventually divorce. It was painful for him, but he knew it was necessary. "She wants to reconcile," he told me during one visit. "She keeps saying she's sorry, that she didn't mean what she said. But Mom, the thing is, I think she did mean it. Not in a cruel way necessarily, but in a way that reveals how she truly sees the world. And I can't live with someone who has such a fundamentally different value system than mine." I didn't tell him what to do. That wasn't my place anymore. But I supported his decision to prioritize character over comfort, integrity over image. Victoria, I learned through Julian, had been asked to leave her position at her company. The story of that night at Marcello's had spread exactly as Antonio predicted, and Victoria became known as the woman who had publicly humiliated a restaurant owner while dining in that very restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on Boston's social circles, and her reputation suffered tremendously. I felt no satisfaction in this, only a kind of sad recognition that actions have consequences, and public cruelty rarely goes unpunished. When I finally returned to Marcello's as a diner rather than a student, Antonio insisted on treating the evening as a celebration. He seated me at the best table in the house, the one by the window overlooking the street, where candlelight reflected in the glass and the city lights sparkled beyond. The staff treated me with warm familiarity rather than formal deference. Over the past months, I had gotten to know many of them by name, had learned their stories, had become part of the Marcello's family. Marcus, the young server who had delivered Antonio's summons to Victoria and Julian that fateful night, served me personally. "It's an honor, Mrs. Morgan," he said with a genuine smile. "Antonio told us to make sure everything is perfect tonight." "Everything is already perfect," I assured him. "I'm just happy to be here as a guest for once, instead of buried in accounting books." The meal was extraordinary, each course a masterpiece of flavor and presentation. Antonio joined me for dessert, a delicate panna cotta with fresh berries that tasted like summer in a spoon. "I have something to tell you," he said, his expression serious but not unhappy. "I've been approached by a restaurant group about opening a second Marcello's, a sister location in New York City. They're prepared to invest heavily, and they want us to maintain creative control." My heart skipped. "Antonio, that's incredible. Thomas would have been thrilled." "It would mean significant expansion," he continued. "More locations, more staff, more complexity, but also more profit, more opportunities, more reach for Thomas's legacy. What do you think?" "What do I think?" I repeated, surprised. "You're the restaurateur. You're the one with experience and vision. Why does my opinion matter? He looked at me as though I had said something foolish. Because you're my partner, Catherine. Equal partner. We make these decisions together. That's what your husband and my father wanted, and that's how we'll honor them. I sat back, feeling the full weight of that statement. Partnership, equality, respect. All the things I had lost with Julian and Victoria, I had found here with Antonio, in a business relationship that had become something more, a true collaboration, built on mutual trust and shared values. Then I think we should do it, I said slowly, but carefully. We don't want to sacrifice quality for expansion. We don't want Marcello's to lose what makes it special. Agreed, Antonio said, raising his wine glass. To careful, quality expansion. To honoring the past while building the future. To partnership. I clinked my glass against his. To partnership. As I left the restaurant that night, walking past the line of people still waiting to get in, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I saw a woman in a well-cut coat and real pearls, a woman who walked with confidence and purpose, a woman who belonged in this place because she had helped create it. I saw Catherine Morgan not as I had been, but as I was becoming. The past would never be erased. The hurt of that night, Julian's silence, Victoria's cruelty, those scars would remain. But scars are simply evidence of healing, proof that wounds closed and life continued. I had been poor, and now I was wealthy. I had been invisible, and now I was seen. I had been dismissed, and now I was respected. But more than any of those external changes, I had reclaimed something more fundamental, my sense of self-worth. My understanding that dignity is not purchased, but inherent. My knowledge that I had value regardless of my bank account, or zip code, or social status. Thomas had left me one final gift, though he never knew it. Not just the restaurant or the money, but the opportunity to discover who I could be when I stopped apologizing for my existence. The opportunity to stand tall, speak clearly, and demand the respect I had always deserved. And in the window's reflection, backlit by the warm glow of Marcello's, I saw that woman looking back at me, steady, strong, and finally, beautifully free.